Who's excited about Connection Night? Let's go. I love this. I love going to Zia. I'm excited to hang out with some of you. I hope you can make it. I'm going to try to make the sermon a little short. We'll see how that actually goes, all right? We are going to close with communion tonight, and I think it's going to be a great night together. So we've been going through the book of Luke, and the Gospel of Luke is all about Jesus being our architect and our archetype. Architect meaning he designs our faith journey. Archetype meaning he gives us an example of what to live into. And we're turning a corner in Luke where we're now looking at the home stretch. So it's really fun for me. I don't know if anybody else thinks this is cool, but today is the first day of Lent. Lent is the 40 days leading up to Easter. In 40 days, we'll celebrate Easter. And that means over the next 40 days, you and I have an opportunity to dedicate ourselves in some way to God. People sometimes do that through fasting certain things or just focusing on certain things. But it's not lost on me that as we looked at the sermon schedule and just put it all together, that today, the day that Jesus enters triumphantly into Jerusalem and heads towards his death and then ultimate resurrection, that over the next 40 days, we get to do the same journey together, culminating on Easter. I mean, it's just amazing. We've been studying Luke for decade, 2 years? It feels like decades. It's just like all we talk about is Luke. And the Lord worked it out so that we get to finish right along with the church calendar with Easter. So I'm thrilled about that. And as we tune our sights towards Jerusalem, today we get to, I think, dig into the nitty-gritty of what Jesus was actually about. So how many of you would say, I have a clear understanding of what Jesus was actually about? It's a rhetorical question, and I love that Jordan raised his hand. I think you do. I do think you know what Jesus was all about. I want to tell you a quick story by way of introduction to this. About a month ago, I got to go to Jordan, the country, and had an incredible time. And we were hanging out with this Christian guy. If you know anything about Jordan, you know that Jordan is 2% Christian. It's about 98% Muslim. And so we're hanging out with this Christian guy who's constantly navigating the challenges of being in a Christian in a Muslim country. And luckily, the people in Jordan, the Muslims in Jordan, are pretty welcoming to the Christian faith and to the Christian brothers and sisters there. But there still is a tension there. And while we were there, this buddy of mine, I don't want to say his name, I don't want it to be recorded on the internet, but this buddy of mine, we had gone up to Mount Nebo, which is the place that's believed that Abraham looked over the Dead Sea and towards the promised land, but didn't get to go in. And so we're hanging out at Mount Nebo and thinking about all the parallels. And this buddy of mine that I just met, but he's a Christian there, meets some guys that knew somebody that he knew, some other Jordanians. And they talked, and I didn't think much of it because this buddy of mine is just the most effusive, welcoming, just an incredible, that you ever hung around people like that you just want to be around? They're just always welcoming people into their life. So he has this conversation with two Muslim guys. And then later, 3 days later, we're at Jerash, which is another really cool site, and it's a historic Roman city. And we come traveling, we come walking in to go look around Jerash, and we see the same two guys. And they run up to this buddy of mine, and they give him a hug, and they're like, they just were effusive with their welcoming to him and their hospitality. And they said, you got to have tea. And we ended up spending time at their shop, and we become friends with these guys, and we're talking about life. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, how did we go maybe that's just Jordan culture, right? But in America, if you see somebody twice, usually in your head, you're like, oh, I saw that guy again. It's not like now they're our best friends. But for them, it was. And what was really, so they're talking in Arabic. And so I didn't catch a lot of the conversation. Caught some of it. No, I didn't catch any of it. So we're driving away. And my buddy says, man, that was an incredible moment. And we were like, really? I mean, it was cool, but what happened? And he said, well, when I met those guys 3 days ago, they asked me, what's your name? And I told him my first name. And they said, well, what's your name? We learned later, or he was telling us, that in Jordan, you're known what religion you are based on your full name. And so they said, what's your name? No, what's your name? And my buddy looked at him and he said, he grabbed him on the shoulder and said, I don't know you well enough yet to tell you my name. And so they broke up, but when they re-engaged, they started talking, and about halfway through the conversation, my buddy says, let me tell you my name. And basically by telling him his full name, he was telling them that he was a Christian. And what I thought was so cool about that is the reality that all of us have these perceptions or ideas or expectations of what somebody else is. But my buddy knew that he didn't want to be classified or put into a pigeonhole like little view of what he was. He wanted people to see his heart. And through that, he hoped that they would see his master and his creator. See, what I think is really interesting about our world is when somebody says they're a Christian, the question I want to ask is, what does that mean to you? Anybody else ever wonder that? I mean, especially in our world, more than ever, right? Like when you say you're a Christian, that could mean a lot of things. Should we go through all the things that it could mean? How would that make us feel in church? Maybe a little uncomfortable, right? Like the people who speak in the name of God have lots of different ideas about what that means. And so I put the question to you again. Do you have a good bead on what Christ was about? This story that we're going to see today is all about a group of people that did not have a good bead. These were studied people. These were people who were very in touch with the Bible and the culture of God. But that was not enough. They weren't in touch with the heart of God. They were not in touch with Jesus, actually. And so the passage we're going to look at today is called the triumphal entry. And it's the story of where Jesus now is coming to Jerusalem on his end. And what I think is really interesting is Jerusalem was the seat or the capital of that area, or of Israel in that time, the Jews in that time. And so these people thought Jesus was coming to take the throne, when what Jesus was really doing was coming to take on the cross. So with that little tidbit, why don't we read and see what you pick up as you listen with me. After Jesus has said this, he went on ahead, going to Jerusalem. And as he approached Bethpage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If any one of you asks, 'Why are you untie it?' say, 'The Lord needs it.'" Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." So they brought it to Jesus. They threw on their cloaks on the colt, and they put Jesus on it. And as he went along, people spread their cloaks, their coats, on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down to the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles that they'd seen. They said, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." All right, this is the triumphal entry. Anybody know what we call this in the church calendar? When do we talk about this story? Palm Sunday, right? You ever wondered what this story is really about? Because I think it's kind of quizzical. Here you've got Jesus who's lived 3 years in ministry. He's done all these miracles. He's taught about God. And he comes to Jerusalem, and he's received in this triumphal way only a week later to be killed by the very people who are shouting and cheering and throwing their cloaks down. You ever wondered, how does this work? What is going on? Why are these people so fickle? Is this just one of those random prophecies that God had to fulfill and then move on with the story? Or is there something deeper happening here? And what I want to tell you is there is something deeper happening here, and it happens to us today. And that is we misunderstand or we have missed expectations of who Jesus actually is. This crowd, I'm going to argue tonight, was confused. Now, they weren't confused for bad reasons. They wanted God. They did. They really wanted God, but they wanted God in their way. And in the same way, what I'm going to argue tonight is I think we do the same thing. We want God, maybe without even knowing it, to fit our view of what we think God should be instead of being submitted to what God is. And so why don't we start with the crowd? We're going to basically do 3 points of what the crowd's expectation of Jesus was. And then we're going to have 3 comparable points comparing to those earlier ones of what Jesus was actually coming to do. So here's the points. The crowd was willing to submit to when? Fix their problems and eliminate evil. Let me just talk about these for a second. First, I use the word submit because there's a really interesting story. If I get time, I'll read it in a little bit. Maybe I'll just brush over it. But there's a story in the Old Testament where as they anointed a king, his name was Jehu, they put down their cloaks. They literally took off their coats, put them down, and he walked over them. And that was a sign of we submit or we're giving you authority to go kick butt and take names for God. And that's what Jehu did. He literally did. You'll see that in a little bit. So the crowd, it's interesting. They saw Jesus coming in. They saw him as the king. And they were willing to submit to their version of Jesus. And their version was a Jesus who wins. He comes in and he accomplishes their goal of winning. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. The second thing is he fixes their problems. They were very much in need of somebody to fix their problems. The Romans were oppressing them. They were losing their cultural identity. Even Jerusalem and their sacred temple was being taken over by heathens and secularists. And so they were looking for a king to come in and fix their problems. And finally, they wanted destruction. They wanted to destroy evil. They wanted the king to come in and with a sword obliterate anybody who was against them. Now, this story, let me just read through the verses real quick. You can write them down if you want to go back later. This story is all about colts, coats, and celebration, right? There's a colt. What's that about? There's cloaks, which I kind of explained, and there's a celebration. This describes, so this story is very intentionally a story within the Jewish history and tradition, right? This story points to 3 very specific prophecies of what the Messiah, the king, the one who was going to return and fix all their problems was going to come to do. And they come from 3 different passages in the Old Testament. Let's just look at them quick. First, the colt. The colt prophecy came from Zechariah 9:9, and this is what it said. Shout and cheer, daughter of Zion. Raise your voice, daughter of Jerusalem. Your king is coming. A good king who makes all things right. He's a humble king riding on a donkey, a mere colt of a donkey. I've had it with war. No more chariots in Ephraim. No more war horses in Jerusalem. No more swords and spears, bows and arrows. He will offer peace to the nations and a peaceful rule worldwide from the 4 winds to the 7 seas. Now, what's really interesting to me about this is how they interpreted this. Very clearly, the prophecy was about a peaceful king. Am I right? And yet they believed the peaceful king was going to eliminate evil, was to come with a sword, and that's the way he was going to make peace. We'll come back to that in a little bit. The second passage was about coats. And I kind of explained it. There's this guy, Jehu. There's a lot of evil in the time. And Israel was looking for a new king. And listen, I don't even know how to I wish I could read the whole thing just for you to see what he did. But it's so interesting that this is the passage that's, when they're laying down their coats, think of it. They're thinking back to Jehu where this happened. And they want Jesus to do this. You ready? How am I going to explain this in a short amount of time? They sprang into action. I'm just going to read a couple verses and then you'll see one up there. They sprang into action. Each man grabbed his robe. They piled them up to the top of the steps for a makeshift throne. Then they blew the trumpet and declared, Jehu's king. So once they declare Jehu's king, by the way, this is in 2 Kings, then he says, all right, it's time to go accomplish the will of the Lord. So when a guy named Jeroham, he represents evil, he saw Jehu coming, it says this in verse 20. When Joram saw Jehu, he called out, good day, Jehu. And Jehu answered, what's good about it? How can there be anything good as long as the promiscuous, whoring, and sorceress of your mother Jezebel pollute the country? Joram wheeled his chariot around and fled, yelling to Uzziah, it's a trap, Uzziah. Jehu pulls on his bow. He released the arrow, hit Jeroham in the shoulder blades, and went right through his heart. He slumped to his knees in his chariot. And this is what it goes on to do. He goes on to basically take a sword, and he is just a warrior for God. And he goes and he kills all of the enemies. And what's so interesting about this, I hope you can see it in my short amount of time that I'm hitting this, is that all of this is captured when they're throwing down their cloaks. They're saying, Rome has come and take over. You're the king because you've done miracles and you can talk on behalf of God. And we want you to come in and we want you to fix our problems and destroy evil. The assumption is he's going to do that with violence, all right? And then finally, I'll just reference this. They give this celebration shout. Did you catch it when I read at the beginning? They say this phrase. Well, that phrase comes from Psalm 118, and just go read it later when you get a chance. If you read that psalm, what you'll get is a psalmist saying, God is on my side. I've prayed, I've submitted to him, and God is on my side. And I'll just say really quickly, I can't help but read the psalm now and see 21st century American Christian. I just can't help see how quickly the misunderstanding comes that yes, if I do things for God, he's going to jump on my shoulder as a warrior, fix my problems, beat up all my enemies, eliminate evil, and show me as victorious. Now, what I want to do is go back really quick to what the crowd was willing to submit to. Am I going too fast? Okay. I want to go back and I just want to explain how I think this is so actually practical for us. See, the crowd, they were willing to submit to God as long as God won. And I see that in our lives too. I think a lot of times when we come to church, what are we looking for? If it's not implicitly this idea that God is going to help me win. Just think about the way we do relationships. You ever been in a relationship where you just want somebody else to see what's happening so you can be proved as right? This is a human condition. We want to win all the time in every way. We want to be the one on the right team. The second thing is performance. I think we want to win through performance. We're very motivated, some of us, to do really good at life so that we can win in life. Life. I think we want to win at life, don't we? Anybody have the deep, deep desire to be successful? Why is that? Where'd that come from? And is that God? We want to win in our families. We want our kids to win. Just talk to any parents of toddlers. It's so hilarious. They're like, my kid just started talking. Is your kid talking yet? You're just like, why does it matter? Except for we have this underlying thought that somehow as a human I have to win. Our country, anybody ever feel like we need to be a part of the best country in the world and that we need to win and be the right ones? What is that? Is that God? Let me just ask you, did God look down from heaven and say, America, man, they're my number one team. Those guys are so awesome that I'm just going to put them on the top and then everybody else a little bit lower, right? We know that's absurd. And yet, do we kind of think it sometimes, right? I think we're just like this crowd. And finally, with religion. You ever been around a group of people or see it in yourself where you have this underlying assumption that you're right because of your religion? Is it possible that God is actually trying to reach everyone? Is it possible that God, I'm not saying all religions are the same. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not arguing that they all lead to the same God, because I don't think they do. But is there this assumption that because I'm following the right religion, these other people are less than me somehow? That is the common, shared human idea that we have to win. And what's really interesting to me is if we see that in ourselves, then we can see ourselves in that crowd that was saying, we want you, King, to win. Now, I'll explain in a little bit, but what did Jesus want? To lose. He did. In fact, the very passage we read last week, whoever would gain his life must lose it. What is Jesus going to do in the next week in Jerusalem? Is he going to win? Yes, long term. No, short term. He's going to get his butt kicked. Find that interesting at all? Find it interesting when we're praying for God to help us accomplish what we think we need, when really maybe God's okay with suffering? He's okay with hardship. He's okay with the pain that it costs to be a human and to work through life. All right, let's try to go through these next two things. They wanted their problems fixed. Anybody else want their problems fixed? Anybody else, when you pray, just inherently, immediately ask God to fix your problems? Right? Like all my prayers are like, God, here's the problem. I can see it clearly. I just want you to know that it would be great if you'd show up and fix that for me, right? And that's what this crowd wanted. Here's the king. Why are we pumped that he's here? We're pumped that he's here so he can fix our problems with the Romans, our economic problems. And what's interesting is Jesus didn't come to fix their problems. In a little bit, I'm going to describe that Jesus came to bring freedom in our problems. Big difference. If Jesus came to fix our problems, then the problems have to be fixed for us to be okay. If Jesus came to bring freedom in the problems, you can walk out of here tonight okay. God can do everything he needs to do in your heart tonight for you to find peace in your situation. You don't have to wait for it to be fixed, right? Now let's go to the third one. The crowd wanted him to eliminate evil. And I think this is even more than fixing problems. This is the way that we approach and think about how God should treat his enemies. Now, you may think that God is out to get the bad guys, right? And maybe even some of you grew up in churches where people said that. This is what God's out to do. He's out to get the bad guys. Are you a bad guy or a good guy? Because if you're a bad guy, he's out to get you. And if you're a good guy, then you're okay. He's going to go get the bad guys. That thinking was true with the crowds then, and it's still true today. And I think it's one of the fundamental reasons we misunderstood Jesus. What was Jesus there to do? Was he there to eliminate evil? I would say he was there to reconcile evil. What did he do with the evil of the cross? Did he eliminate it? No, he met it head on. What did he do with human suffering? Did he avoid it in any way? Did he obliterate it in any way? He met it head on. He steeled himself and said, whatever earth you can throw at me, throw it at me so the people will know that I am here for them. I am here to save them. See, this crowd misunderstood who Jesus was. They just didn't get it. It makes sense. Just like I think we do. This crowd, just like us, assumed a God of their own making. And my invitation for you to consider today is, are you following the God of your own making? Or are you following the actual Jesus? It is my conviction, 100%, that when we start following the actual Jesus, that is when the life and the freedom comes. That is when the wholeness starts to come in our life. That is when peace starts to show up. That's when joy starts to show up. When we stop our ideas of what God is and we move to who God actually is. So let's transition there. This is what Jesus was. Jesus was also willing to submit. We see that he submitted to God, that his whole actions on earth was a process of following the long-range plan that God had for humanity. And he was willing to submit to lose. He was willing to submit to bring freedom from our problems. And he was willing to submit to reconcile evil. Let's just talk about those super quick. I've already mentioned them. I wish I had more time to talk about these. But I'll read a couple scriptures and just highlight why I think this is so true. First, Jesus was willing to lose. He lost on the cross. And he said, if anybody would want to find his life, you must lose it. And what I think that actually means for us is that sometimes you have to lose to win. Doug taught me this. Doug's one of our elders. When we were at a time in our church when a contract was broken and it was going to cost the church $50,000. And we had the choice to either take up litigation and go after our money because it was rightly owed to us, or we had the chance to walk away. And I was so pissed. I'm sorry. I just was so angry. And I was like, God, you got to get them. And I was just like, so much of me needed to win in that moment because they were wrong and they did something evil to the church of God. And it was in those moments of turmoils that Doug said this to me. He said, DJ, sometimes to win, you have to lose. And he said, what did Jesus do? That turned out to be a defining moment in my life because I learned that I'm not the one that has to find vengeance and justice. I don't have to win. God gets to decide if he chooses to win. And I would just say that as a simple analogy for you too. You don't have to win. You don't have to be proved right all the time. Jesus will be proved right in the long run. But he's going to do it in a weird way, right? He's going to do it through going to the cross and suffering. And it's that way that he's going to reconcile humanity to himself. And in the same way, I would say for us, we need to trust the Lord's way of dealing and reconciling instead of our way. There's a lot of nuance there. I wish I didn't have to go further. There's a lot about what does that mean to lose and when do I know how to lose? And I guess we'll have to change that for a subject over coffee sometime. The second point, Jesus came to bring freedom from our problems. So pick a problem that you have today. Do you have any problems? I do. Holy crap. I have problems. And what was Jesus's goal with our problems? He goes to the cross. What's that mean? That's like, oh, come on. That doesn't even make sense. It just sounds like religious jargon, unless it's not. What if that's the secret to all of our problems? Listen to what Paul said in Ephesians. He said this, because of the sacrifice of the Messiah, his blood poured out on the altar of the cross, we are a free people. Free. What do you think of when you hear free? How would your problems feel if you were free and still had your problems? Is that possible? The interesting thing about problems is they steal our freedom because we become a slave to them. We think about them. We're wrestling with them. We're not sure what to do about them. And Jesus came to make freedom possible in our problems. He goes on to say, free of the penalties, free of the punishment chalked up by all our misdeeds. How many of your problems have to do with your own sins? I mean, amen. So many of the things that I find problems in my life are related directly to how I live this life. And Jesus came to set us free from the consequences of that. That's the whole point of the cross. I'm going to suffer so you don't have to. I'm going to suffer so that you don't take the burden that you really should be taking from what you've done. He goes on to say, not just barely free either, abundantly free. Who wants to be abundantly free? I know I do. That just sounds good to my soul. That just sounds so good. He thought of everything, provided for everything we could possibly need, letting us in on the plans he took such a delight in making. He set it all before us in Christ, a long-range plan in which everything would be brought together and summed up in him. Everything in deepest heaven, everything on planet Earth. I love that scripture because it shows, it speaks to me that when Jesus is going into Jerusalem, you ever thought about what he must have felt like in this moment? He's on a colt. He's filling a prophecy. There's people shouting and cheering his name, and he's like, you're going to spit at me. You're going to hurl insults at me. I mean, like, how could you handle that? I would struggle for sure. Like, I just don't know how to like step into that moment. And yet he's stepping in because he has this plan to reconcile all of humanity to himself. The interesting thing, last point, interesting thing about evil is who does evil come from? The evil in this world. Me. Evil is not just a theory. Evil is a person. And if Jesus came to eliminate evil, then you would have to tie him up as the one who came to eliminate people. You'd have to work your theology into this great little knot of like, God came and he wants to destroy people because they're evil. I think the only other option is to actually look in the mirror and be like, am I evil? Do I contribute to evil? And just tonight on the way into church, I pulled my daughter aside and was like, did I hurt you when I did this thing today? And she was like, no. And she started crying. I was like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt you today. That was evil. You may not want to call it evil. That's what evil is. Evil is anything that is destructive to humans and destructive to our life. Who saves us from that? Jesus did. Jesus came not to obliterate me. He came to save me. He didn't come to put an end to evil. He came to step in and let evil put an end to him, right? He's on the cross and evil is literally killing him, taking his breath, taking his blood. And then he raises from the dead and he says, I've beat that and so can you. This is a great mystery, isn't it? This whole Christian faith thing is like, there's some moments where I'm just like, pfft. And yet there's something that always grabs my heart and says, yes, I want to follow that. I want to know that Jesus, not the one of my own making. And so as we close, David, you want to come plink for a little bit? We're just going to take communion. We got to get to Zia. We got a big night ahead, but the church has been taking communion for centuries, decades, centuries, millennias. It's wild. And really what communion is about is it's Jesus' invitation to remember what he has done for you.